and welcome to the Birmingham Temple. This is an evening that all of us have looked forward to with great anticipation. But over the weekend, something happened that we had not anticipated. And it was an event that has traumatized most of us. When I first heard the news, I was unbelieving. I didn't imagine that it had happened. That some assassin had killed Yitzhak Rabin. But it was true. He was dead. And one of the people who had become, over the last 3 years, one of my heroes, was no longer there. No longer there to be the leader. I had seen him develop over the years as an extraordinary leader. He was a sabra, he was a military man, he was a patriot, he was a tough guy. And 3 years ago, when he became the Prime Minister of Israel, he had to make a very tough decision. Whether to reverse the habits of a lifetime and become the leader of a movement that might arrange, finally, for peace in the Middle East. And he did it. There was that handshake with Arafat and then with Hussein. And peace in the Middle East was beginning, and that was because of Yitzhak Rabin. And the only reason why Israel was willing to do it was they knew that at the head there was this man who was a patriot, somebody they could trust. And without him, it would not have taken place. So he's gone. And there's a lot of pain, a lot of grieving, and a lot of anger. But we have to remember something. He has a legacy. And that legacy is the legacy of hope. I mean, without peace, there is no hope. It's the legacy of hope. He's a man of courage. And so this evening, before we begin the program, it's very important. We have to emotionally and intellectually and in every way say, Yitzhak, the dream that you had will not die, because the people who may have planned your death, the person who killed you, wanted to destroy your dream. But your dream will live on because the Jewish people want it to live on, because all the people of goodwill in the world want it to live on. So what I'd like to do is to invite all of you to rise. Let us stand for a moment of silent tribute to the life of Yitzhak Rabin, to the courage of Yitzhak Rabin, to the legacy of Yitzhak Rabin. And while doing that, committing ourselves to the fulfillment of the vision for which he gave his life. Na'aseh shalom ba'olam, let us make peace in the world. Na'aseh shalom aleinu, let us make peace for all of us, v'al kol Yisrael, and for all the people of Israel, for all the Jewish people, v'al kol ha'amim, and for all the nations of the world. Ve'imaru, and let us say all together, shalom. Please. For those of you who may be interested, this coming Friday evening here at the Birmingham Temple at 8 o'clock, I will be talking about the life of Rabin and the meaning of his death, the killing, and and what we can anticipate for the future. Let me say that one of the people whom we are honoring this evening cannot be here physically, but he's certainly here in terms of spirit in our minds and in our hearts. He was the president and leader of this congregation. His name, Eli Master. And he worked very hard for the welfare of this community, and he loved humanistic Judaism. And he was active in preparing for its future, and he thought of the wonderful importance of training the leaders and rabbis of the future. And so we pay tribute this evening to the work he did. And in fact, Larry Kasdan has come here to deliver the Eli Master Memorial Lecture talk. And I would now like to introduce to you the person who will introduce Larry. She was Eli's partner in life. She shared his vision and his passion for the things that were important to improve this community and to enhance the future of humanistic Judaism. She was and remains a leader in the Birmingham Temple and in the international world of humanistic Judaism. Her name, Lynn Master.
Good evening, and welcome to the second Eli Master Memorial Lecture of the Birmingham Temple Humanist Forum. 2 years ago, Robert Reich, the United States Secretary of Labor, graced us with his presence. Tonight's program is a benefit for the Eli Master Memorial Scholarship for Rabbinical Training. With your kind indulgence, I would like to make a few remarks about my husband and the fund established in his memory. Eli Master was a very important leader of this congregation. He served as its president from 1991 to 1992. He was involved in every aspect of its membership growth, community development, financial stability, and outreach programs. Many of you who have attended the Humanist Forum through the years will remember the wonderful speakers he presented and introduced so eloquently. Eli was a handsome and charismatic man who had that rare quality of attracting attention when he entered a room or spoke. However, he was far more interested in other people, what they had to say, and what concerned their lives. He was a man who could easily express his feelings and his affection. His handshake was his bond, and his integrity was his identity. A Montrealer, a graduate of McGill University, Eli was also a respected business leader in his industry, building and managing high-rise offices that are landmarks of the Metro Detroit skyline, and later nationally in the multifamily housing business. He served the community in many ways. He was, for example, the chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee for the University of Michigan Hillel. At the time of his death, he was national president-elect of the Crohn's Colitis Foundation of America. So when Eli died suddenly and unexpectedly of a heart attack while we were on vacation in Florida 3 years ago, the outpouring of grief from so many was not surprising. An Eli Master Leadership Award was established in his industry to recognize those who best demonstrated his qualities in their work with people. His tireless work on the national board and as past president of the Michigan region was recognized by a 2-year research grant titled in his name and funded by the Crohn's Colitis Foundation. I was overwhelmed by nearly 1,000 pieces of mail in the form of cards, contributions, and personal notes. Friends and strangers wrote to me about the help and acts of kindness he had offered. I knew how well loved and respected he was by the way people responded to him, but it was through those hundreds of letters that I learned in detail of the depth of his remarkable generosity. So a memorial fund was established when he died. Many of you here contributed to it, and a decision had to be made as to the best way to honor him. He was so interested and so committed and involved in so many, many good causes. But he was absolutely committed to humanistic Judaism and its successful proliferation throughout North America and the world. He and I traveled together to attend meetings, to speak, and to assist emerging congregations and communities in the United States, Israel, and Europe. He believed that in addition to other professional leaders, rabbis would be essential for the future of humanistic Judaism. Today, the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism is a reality. The Rabbinical Training Program is a reality. Rabbis in training are a reality. A class of pre-rabbinical trainees is a reality. These students follow an extraordinarily rigorous program which includes completion of a PhD in Judaic studies prior to ordination. Their studies are lengthy and costly. They need assistance. This endowed fund, with your support and in memory of Eli, will provide it. Please accept my grateful appreciation for your generosity in this worthwhile project. And if you should decide to enhance your support, contribution cards are available this evening from the ushers, from the International Institute, and from the Birmingham Temple. One of Eli's passions was the movies. Lawrence Kasdan makes the kind of movies Eli loved. I have known Larry and Meg Kasdan since shortly after they were married by Silver Wine, and Larry was working as a copywriter at the donor agency, advertising agency here in Detroit. Meg was teaching Sunday school at Birmingham Temple. You can't really speak about Larry without speaking about Meg. While they each have their own identity and incredible individual talent and personal achievements, they are nonetheless a successful team, an effective partnership, devoted friends, and a rare and loving couple. Meg hails from Michigan. Larry was born in Miami Beach, and was raised in Morgantown, West Virginia. His father wanted to be a writer, but he earned his living as a salesman. He died when Larry was a young teenager. His mother also aspired to write and was accepted to a prestigious writing program at the University of Wisconsin. She raised 4 children instead. Whether it was by their example, or inspiration, or inheritance, Larry wanted to write from youth. He chose to attend the University of Michigan because of the rich undergraduate writing awards it offered, and he helped pay for college by winning these awards 3 years in a row. He graduated with a BA in English Literature and a master's degree in education. Then he was recruited by the WB Donor Advertising Agency. One of the first television commercials he wrote was a spot for high grades West Virginia brand bacon. See if you remember this. A group of founding fathers are sitting around a table discussing what to name their state. Georgia had been named for a peach. Idaho had been named for a potato. At last, one of the gentlemen announces, "That's it, we'll name it bacon." The voiceover says, "West Virginia, a bacon so great, they named a state after it." He won the highest award offered in advertising, a Clio, the equivalent of an Academy Award. This was in his first year in the ad business. Despite his success, really, Larry wanted to write screenplays. And in fact, it was known that he had works in progress while a donor. He and Meg decided to move out to LA, and ultimately, his enormous talent and tenacity prevailed. He co-wrote 2 of the Star Wars trilogy, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. The Bodyguard, which was submitted 67 times before it was sold, was eventually produced by Larry. It made over $400 million. Those, plus Raiders of the Lost Ark, commissioned by George Lucas, are 4 of the most successful films in motion picture history. Each film is, of course, surrounded by interesting circumstances. For example, Continental Divide was written while sitting on the lawn during his lunch hours in front of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The film noir, Body Heat, which he wrote, was also his directorial debut. Silverado, now considered a classic, was his first Western and co-written with his brother, Mark. The Big Chill was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Accidental Tourist, which Larry wrote, directed, and produced, received 4 Academy Award nominations, Best Picture of 1988 by the New York Film Critics, and a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for Gina Davis. Wyatt Earp is the only film about the legendary character that called attention to Earp's Jewish wife. My personal favorite is Grand Canyon, which Larry wrote and produced with Meg. It earned them Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations for Best Original Screenplay and the Golden Bear Award at the Berlin Festival as Best Picture of 1992. As you look at this remarkable body of work, it is clear that it has been written by and for intelligent adults. It examines life, challenges morality, and magnifies people and the power of friendship. Like Larry, it is idealistic and honorable. So now, with our gratitude and thanks to him and to Meg, and on behalf of the Eli Master Memorial Scholarship for Rabbinical Studies, I present to you the man who the New York Times said looks like a rabbi, Lawrence Kasdan.
Very much. Lynn, thank you. That was beautiful. It was very helpful too, because my son, John, my younger son, was in the lobby a few minutes ago, and he heard a woman say, so what was his last picture? And the guy she was with said, I don't know. And she said, you see, no one knows a damn thing about this guy. And you have rectified that. I wish you hadn't read that West Virginia brand bacon. Undercut the myth. It's getting harder and harder to get out of bed in the morning. I was going to say get up, but up is no longer the operative word. I slide out of the bed horizontally until my legs go over the edge, and then gravity grabs and pulls them down. My feet hit the floor. And this brings my torso up in response, and I find myself sitting on the edge of the bed, shaking my head like this, slowly. I'm not shaking it in despair or consternation about all the impossible questions that life throws at me each day. I'm trying to get my neck going. It's incredibly stiff in the morning. It comes from tension, I think. It's also incredibly stiff most afternoons and evenings. The times it's not incredibly stiff are when I'm carefree. When I have absolutely no tasks or responsibilities ahead for me that day. Like, I'm on vacation on the Italian Riviera. Trouble is, I've only been on vacation in the Italian Riviera once. For a week. As I heave myself into an erect position and head to the bathroom, the Achilles tendons in my heel scream in protest. And I have to quickly try to remember how to walk. It feels like I'm stumbling along on two pegs, like Long John Silver without a good leg. I know where that pain comes from. It's from tennis. I've been playing a lot lately. You know, I used to play a lot of things when I was younger, and I didn't get all these after effects. How can someone like me, who truly feels in his mind that he is 25 years old, be creaking along this way? On Wednesday night last week, my family and I flew from LA to Detroit to celebrate the birthday of my sweet mother-in-law, Doris Goldman. And I started to do a little work on my computer and naturally, immediately fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, my wife, Meg, was sitting next to me, looking at me. "How was your nap?" she asked. "Fine," I said, as I rubbed my eyes and put my eyeglasses back on. I could see that my two sons, Jake and John, were both sleeping in the seats ahead of us. I felt rested and peaceful for about 15 seconds. All of a sudden, I got the most ferocious pain behind my left eye, sharp and deep as a dagger, unlike anything I had ever experienced. I swooned with the suddenness and severity of it. I won't bore you with all the details of the next 15 minutes until it ended, but I will tell you that I was certain that the pain was caused by one of two things. Either it was the first sign of a brain tumor, or it was the first wave of a cerebral hemorrhage that was going to end my life right there, that moment, 20 minutes outside of Detroit Metro. And I don't even know what a cerebral hemorrhage is. I told Meg what was going on, and how much I had liked spending my life with her. She was concerned. She told me to take a couple aspirin. Then she asked me if I'd give her a neck massage. I survived that episode. For all I know, I was right about one of my diagnoses, and I'm simply living on borrowed time right now, as I speak to you tonight. Maybe the truth is we're all living on borrowed time always. When the young gunfighter in Clint Eastwood's film Unforgiven says about a recently murdered man, "He had it coming," Eastwood replies, "We all got it coming, kid." I know that when I was younger, say when I was 23 and getting married in this building, I didn't think that every headache was a hemorrhage, every mole a cancer, every heartburn a coronary. That kind of thinking comes only with age. Youthful minds don't think that. They don't think that way, but for me, things have changed. I think about everything differently at this age. And that probably has influenced my story and the way I tell it. A story which, for the purposes of this evening, we will call a humanist in Hollywood. I'm going to be 47 in January. 47 is not that old. I was born in January 1949. Meg was born a year earlier, in 1948. November, actually, but a long 6 weeks before me. So she is an older woman. My mother told me my whole life that I was 6 weeks late. I didn't question that too closely. I don't know a lot about obstetrics. I sort of believed her. When she told Meg that I was born 6 weeks late, Meg looked at her like she was crazy, which is always appropriate in my mother's case. Actually, Meg just nodded and looked at me like my mother was crazy. To be honest, I believe that all the tension I hold in my neck and body comes not from my age at all, but from the work I do, from the environment I do it in, and from the society in which I do. I grew up in the 50s in West Virginia. Everyone went to the movies sometimes in Wheeling, West Virginia, at the Ford Theater in the Capitol, downtown, or the Mayfair, out my neighborhood. But my older brother Mark and I went all the time. No one in Wheeling, except maybe my brother, thought much about how movies were made. There was a vague notion that the actors made up the dialogue, something like that. Remember, this was 25 years before this explosion of coverage about show business, entertainment, movies, movie business, things that no one should really be interested in. As for me, I played ball, slouched through school, chased girls, and rode my bike. You owned the town if you had a bike. There were no freeways, or traffic jams, or dangerous neighborhoods. But the thing I liked the best was going to the movies. I liked the dark, cool room, the big screen, the adventures and emotions and sexual excitement that those stories contain. I went to see an Alec Guinness movie called Our Man in Havana. There was a scene in a Cuban nightclub where the topless showgirls, you heard me, topless, in 1958, had been artfully protected by the position of the camera, so that the high back of a dining booth hid their nakedness from view. I got out of my seat and hurried up to the back of the theater. It didn't work, but it was my first lesson in cinematography. I idolized Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck, Cary Grant, Paul Newman. I fell in love with Gene Simmons, Shirley Jones, Grace Kelly, and Rhonda Fleming. Rhonda Fleming was so zot. Westerns, comedies, adventures, romances, war movies, American movies, where good always triumphed over evil by the end, where the leads were always good-hearted and great-looking, and the music told you just how to feel. I liked them all. I wasn't picky. If it flickered and moved, I was in. When the lights went down and the curtain opened, I was as happy, as we say in West Virginia, as a pig in, well, I was happy as a pig in a movie theater. Then in 1959, I saw the first of what I'll call the lightning movies. These are the movies, and they've kept coming at me on an irregular basis for 35 years. The movies that struck me like a bolt from the sky, altered my thinking, changed my life. In 1959, that picture was The Magnificent Seven. It starred a collection of lesser-known Hollywood actors, not superstars, but they were the coolest group I'd ever seen. Yul Brynner, James Coburn, Charles Bronson, and the man who has become my favorite star of all time, Steve McQueen. I had no awareness at the time that the director was a Hollywood pro named John Sturges, that he had already directed several films that stirred my imagination, or that he was about to direct another one of my lightning movies, The Great Escape. I didn't know or care about any of that. But what I got from the movie, in strong, clear waves, was this. No matter what pose these characters adopted, they were the good guys. They were going to do the honorable thing, no matter what it cost them. They were brave, and they were going to stay brave under the most dire circumstances. And even though they were hardened gunfighters, the values they held most dear were these: loyalty, courage, trust, family, compassion, the sanctity of life itself. I did not know that the movie was based on a Japanese film by the greatest director of all time. But I knew that the images, the costumes, the way that people moved, the humor and recklessness of all the characters, even the villain, the sound, and especially the music, dun, 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 all of it touched something deep down in me. It made its values tangible for me in a way that school and parents and temple and Sunday school had failed. In other words, it was the most powerful introduction to humanist values I had ever had. And its lessons imprinted themselves on my 10-year-old brain for life. It wasn't until The Great Escape came out 2 years later with the same actors and director, plus other wonderful British actors. I couldn't believe it, the Brits were cool too. Its images of World War II in the Bavarian countryside, its overwhelming sense of patriotism linked with bravery, that I began to accept something else. I wanted to live in the world that I found in the movies. It was better than the world I actually lived in. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. It was as new and disturbing to me as sex. The next year, 1962, something happened that made everything clear. My family had moved to Miami Beach. My brother, a student at Harvard now, was visiting. He told me we had to go to see a particular movie down on Lincoln Road. We got on a bus and rode for an hour through traffic. When we arrived at the theater, we were told we were welcome to go in, but the movie had started 2 minutes earlier. My brother refused to enter. He said this movie was too good to come in the middle. I thought he was insane, but I worshipped him. We hung around Lincoln Road for 5 hours waiting for the start of the evening show. When it started, I realized that my brother was right. The movie was Lawrence of Arabia, and there was not a wasted second, not a wasted frame in more than 3 hours of film. Lightning struck again, my world shook. When we came out into the balmy Florida evening, I had a new hero. It wasn't T.E. Lawrence, the hero of the Arabian campaign. It was David Lean, the man who had made this masterpiece. I was 13 years old, and I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I have to digress here a moment. I'd like to leave it at that my destiny was clear the day I saw Lawrence. But of course, nothing is that simple. A great deal happened between that day in '62 and the day 18 years later when I stepped onto a set back in Florida again and began directing my first film. I had just directed a play for the first time in 25 years in Los Angeles. It's called 4 Dogs and a Bone. It was written by John Patrick Shanley, a wonderful playwright, an Oscar-winning screenwriter for Moonstruck, and a friend of mine. The bone of the title, 4 Dogs and a Bone, is a low-budget film being shot on the streets of New York. The 4 dogs fighting for control of the bone are 2 actresses, the producer, and the idealistic young screenwriter. At one point, the producer tries to explain to the writer why all of them have stuck it out through the relentless struggle, disappointment, backbiting, and treachery that characterizes a life in the movies. He tells the writer this story. Once there was a great big pregnant bear, and after a painful labor, She gave birth to 7 baby bears. So she was very tired. And she looked at her 7 babies, and they were all gooey and slimy with afterbirth. And in that miraculous way that nature has built the bear, she felt in her heart a tremendous welling up of material feeling. And this maternal feeling, actually the writer corrects it when he says that. And this maternal feeling filled her with strength. So she licked and licked and licked her babies, one after the other, rendering them clean and fresh and beautiful. That is, until she got to the 7th little bear. Right then, she ran out of gas, had a seizure, and dropped dead. Where to? And the 6 well-tended little bears with their beautiful brown coats shed a tear, a tender tear, and bounded off into the woods. And the 7th cub, the unlicked cub, went into show business. Now, when the screenwriter hears this story, he asks the producer, "That's it?" The producer replies, "That's it. Whenever I can't believe the behavior of somebody in the business, I think, this is an unlicked cub." Whenever I can't believe my behavior, I think I am an unlicked cub. Being shocked, being taken aback, it's a waste of time. This is the way we are, let's get on with it. Well, that speech is one of the reasons I wanted to direct that play in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, in the belly of the beast. I believe it to be true. I believe that most of the people I know in the movie business are unlicked cubs. And the stamina they have, the relentlessness that lets them sustain and survive and succeed in this competitive, cutthroat, highly desirable line of work, comes bubbling up from some deep, early need, some unfulfilled need, some lack of nurturing, of recognition, of licking, some loving that wasn't there when they were very young. It's not always a pretty quality to look at, but it's almost always there. And of course, show business is not the only place you'll find it. In 1963, when I was 14 years old, several things happened. In the spring, my parents were divorced after 20 difficult years of marriage. My mother, with whom I did not get along, took me and my sisters back to West Virginia, leaving my father alone in Florida. In November, John Kennedy was shot, and the world stopped with a gasp to note it. In December, exactly 1 month later, my father died in Miami, and the world seemed not to notice at all. I was shocked. As my teen years passed, I grew further and further estranged from my mother, so that by the time I was in high school, I felt a bit like an orphan. I spent my time with friends, or at the movies, or more and more, all alone, writing. When it came time to apply to college, a friend told me that the University of Michigan had the richest college writing contest in the country, the Hopwood Awards, and that the great playwright Arthur Miller had won the award and helped pay his way through school. I had no money myself, and with Horatio Alger-like optimism, I determined to do the same. It worked. I won the award a lot. My winnings made my education possible. But in addition to the money, the awards gave me recognition and validation that what I was writing might have some value in the world. And I think it's worth noting that right from the start, right there was a confusion in my mind between the value of the work for the sake of itself, in other words, art, and its value in terms of money, in other words, commerce. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does it make a sound? If art is created in our culture and no one is there to applaud or pay for it, does it have value? Or to put it another way, how much licking did I need to keep picking? At Michigan, something else happened for me. During the late 60s, the university was not only the scene of enormous social upheaval and political ferment, but also the beneficiary of a cultural explosion. One aspect of which was a huge enthusiasm for film. The courses and resources for production at Michigan were primitive, but there was no shortage of films to be seen. Cinema societies sprung up all over campus. Art film theaters opened around town. For a movie-crazed West Virginia boy who had had access only to the current Hollywood films of the early 50s, and early 60s, it was like landing on another planet. I could barely get myself to attend regular classes, even classes I was interested in. I was seeing something like 10 movies a week, reading about movies, talking about movies, and very soon writing movies. The world of foreign film opened up to me, and I saw the work of Alain Resnais, Jean-Luc Godard, Roberto Rossellini, Ingmar Bergman, Francois Truffaut, Michelangelo Antonioni, and dozens of others, including the man I came to regard as the greatest director of all, the Japanese master Akira Kurosawa. The man who had made one of the best films of all time, The Seventh Samurai, the movie that was remade in America as The Magnificent Seven. Just as amazing to me were all the old American movies I had never seen, the work of Preston Sturges, Joseph Mankiewicz, William Wyler, Orson Welles, Billy Wilder, George Cukor, John Huston, Anthony Mann, and Howard Hawks, and John Ford. Between these most American of filmmakers and these foreign geniuses, I saw that movies could be anything and everything, that if you could imagine it, it could be a film, that no subject was too large or too small for the movies. All that mattered was the passion and the talent of the filmmakers. I began to see that not all the stories followed the Hollywood conventions, that foreign films obeyed no rules, that often they would follow the natural dictates of the story and let it end on a pessimistic note, or a despairing note, or an eccentrically personal note, anything that seemed justified by the integrity of the story. Not every story had a happy ending. Justice did not always win. The little guy often remained vanquished at the end. I began to see that the Hollywood films I had grown up on had been preaching a hidden agenda of optimism and the inevitable triumph of true love and goodness. When I looked closely at the sophisticated, cynical, worldly work of Hawks or an Anthony Mann or Orson Welles, I could see that they had subverted some of the Hollywood conventions to tell stories in their own way for their own purposes, to get at something closer to what was true for them. Some kind of critical mass must have been reached in the country because at this moment, this same moment, even Hollywood exploded. A new generation of filmmakers with new ideas about what would work suddenly found their movies playing everywhere. Here are just a few of the films I saw at the State Theater in Michigan, in the Fifth Forum, and the Fox Village between 1967 and 1972. And as I read you this list, think about the movies that Hollywood has offered you in the last 5 years. This is what was offered in that 5 years. Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, In the Heat of the Night, Cool Hand Luke, In Cold Blood, Point Blank, 2001. Battle of Algiers, Bullet, Rosemary's Baby, Butch Cassidy, Midnight Cowboy, Z, They Shoot Horses, Bob and Carol and Pinellas, Easy Rider, The Wild Bunch, Take the Money and Run, Medium Cool, 5 Easy Pieces, MASH, Women in Love, The Last Picture Show, A Clockwork Orange, The French Connection, Sunday, Bloody Sunday, Carnal Knowledge, The Conformist, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Straw Dogs, Harold and Maude, Deliverance, Cabaret, The Candidate, Last Tango in Paris, and The Godfather. This was the most exciting thing happening in the world as far as I was concerned. Every weekend, some new film was waiting at the local theater to blow our minds. Movies were even better than I thought. They could be an actual, true expression of your deepest concerns, your most fundamental needs. If you had something you had to express, a story you wanted to tell, this was the place, this was the medium. If you had values that you held dear, even if you hadn't put a name to them yet, This was the way to communicate them to the world. And if, by the way, in making these films, you got a little needed licking, that was okay too. I knew what I had to do. I had no choice. I was going to give my life to the movies, no matter what discouragements lay ahead. I would have no alternative plan. No alternative plan. That became my mantra, my platform, my religion. I was going to become a movie director, or else, what? Nothing. There was no alternative plan. That's how I got through the next 7 years. I worked at other jobs. I wrote in my free time. I got rejected and discouraged and rejected again. But there was nowhere to run, no matter how dismal the situation became, because there was no acceptable substitute for the movies, no alternative plan. Now, maybe I sound a little crazed when I talk about that. I think you have to be. In those 7 years, I worked in a record store in Ann Arbor. I married Meg. I got a master's degree in education and was saved from unemployment by Stan Burkoff, who had heard I was a writer, hired me at WB Donut, the best advertising agency in Detroit. I started in 1972 at $150 a week. But the kind of hours they were working us then, that came out to about $2.50 an hour. I didn't care. I was happy to have any job, just so we could live until I made it in the movies. There wasn't a moment when I thought advertising was going to be my life. I was going to write myself into the movies, no alternative plan. After 3 years at Donor, I was making 21 grand a year, more money than my father had ever made. It seemed like a lot to me. I didn't care. I had never had any money, so I didn't place much value in it. Meg had always had enough money, so she didn't think about it much either. I guess for these very different reasons, neither of us worried about it. That turned out to serve us pretty well later on. By 1975, when I went to LA to produce some commercials, I was pretty much going out of my mind. All I could think about was the movies. I had just completed my 6th screenplay. The previous 5 had all met ignominious ends. I took the new script with me and was able that week, after 5 years, to finally get an agent. I also got a new job in advertising. I found an apartment, and I produced the commercials. That week, my mojo was really working. I moved my wife and year-old son to Los Angeles that summer over the loud and extended protest of my in-laws. I didn't blame them. They were crazy for their daughter and their new grandson. My prospects, no matter how passionate my commitment, did not look good. They argued with power and conviction. Why couldn't I stay in Detroit, they asked, and continue to write screenplays there? There was no rational answer. I just had to get near the movies. I tell you this not to embarrass my in-laws, who I dearly love and admire, but to let you know how strong was this drive, this instinct, this attraction to the white-hot light of career. I don't know what was driving me. I'm not sure to this day what allowed me to overcome their siren song and my own fears and take my new family out there. Most of you have probably had a moment like that in your lives. The important moment. The moment when you knew what was the right thing to do. My new agent was very excited about the prospects of selling my screenplay, which I had written on the kitchen table of a townhouse in Point O Woods, an apartment complex right down 12 miles between Northwestern and Telegraph. My agent thought he could sell it in a week. He sent it out immediately and got the first of these 67 rejections over 2 years. I had entitled the screenplay The Bodyguard. During that 2-year period, as the rejections piled up, I wrote 2 more screenplays, as my hard-won agent threatened to let me go. And while I wrote advertising for Volkswagen and the gas company and the Los Angeles Times, 2 movies came out that were going to change Hollywood forever, and not necessarily for the better. One was Steven Spielberg's Jaws, and the other was George Lucas's Star Wars. Since the beginning, Hollywood had been about making money. That has not changed. And these two movies did not make the studios avaricious and obsessed for the first time. Film has always been the place where art and business met in uneasy interdependency. What happened at this moment, though, was that these two movies ushered in the era of the blockbuster, when a single motion picture could make so much money around the world and be marketed in so many ingenious ways that it changed people's ideas about how high was up, how much was enough. For 70 years, Hollywood had operated on the idea that movies made for a reasonable price could make a reasonable profit. And that profit could be used to make more product, much like other businesses. But those two movies showed people that a single film could change the balance sheet of a corporation forever. When 20th Century Fox was done investing its winnings from Star Wars, it was a proud new owner of any number of businesses in far-ranging fields, including television stations, Pebble Beach Resort, and a good chunk of Aspen, Colorado. By the same token, Jaws had forever affected the cash flow and possibilities of the MCA Corporation, which immediately began to expand in many directions. Multinational corporations became interested in owning studios. The scent of the blockbuster, the proverbial home run, became an irresistible lure, not just to new owners, but to experienced studio bosses whose sights had suddenly been lifted. The production of modest moneymakers for more specialized audiences, the singles and doubles of the movie business, lost its appeal. The main and overpowering goal of the studios became to make movies that would appeal to the absolute largest number of people. The same criteria that had dominated television for many years. And preferably young teenage boys who were in the habit of seeing a picture over and over again and were the basis of any blockbuster. Movies came to be thought of as items to be sold like a candy bar or an automobile or a toaster. Sneak previews, a valued old tradition of the studio system, suddenly became research screenings and took on, in a technological era, the numbers and weight of science. How could the product be shaped to be most popular and offend the fewest? Offend began to be equated with challenging the audience, making them think, leaving them stirred up and ambivalent. Those were bad things. Those weren't the things that people wanted. Happy endings, again, became the order of day. Whether the story justified it or not, what the researchers were asking, goes down easiest. What is the least ambiguous, the most easily understood? What will muss the fewest feathers? Of course, that's not what art is all about. But it is what commerce is all about. At the same time, the very reasons for the success of Star Wars and Jaws, their startling originality and their vibrant reinvention of old forms, was ignored by the researchers and the studio heads, and with good reason. Those things cannot be generated by research, or numbers, or even money. Those things require art and talent. If it had not been those two movies, it would have been some others. It was probably inevitable. Every other aspect of American culture was headed that way already. Why not the movies? If our political and intellectual life was every day becoming more and more about surface and less about substance, who had the time to worry about something as trivial as the movies? Besides, everyone was getting rich. I was still working at Doyle Dane Bernbach Advertising in Los Angeles in July of 1977, when my agent called to say that for some reason, after 2 years, Warner Brothers wanted to option The Bodyguard. Sitting in my dreaded cubbyhole at the agency, I was ecstatic. Then the bad news, though my agent didn't see it that way. They had made what he considered a fair offer of $13,000 for the year's option. My heart sank. I needed $20,000, I said. Why? Said my panicked agent. You're finally getting somewhere. Don't push your luck. I told him I'd get back to him. I called up Meg and told her to find someone to take care of Jacob. She had to come down to the office and help me decide what to do. She arrived an hour later and we went out to walk around the block. After all these years, we wondered, were we ready to risk seeing it all go away? We need $20,000, I said, so I can support us for 1 solid year of concentrated writing. That's it, then, she said. If they don't value the script enough to go the extra $7 grand, they're probably not serious enough to sell it to them. That sounded about right to me. I went back to the office and called my agent. He didn't like it much. But of course, he probably wouldn't have had the sense to marry Meg either. He said he'd try. 5 minutes later, he called back. Warner Brothers would go to $20,000 to $20,000, no problem. I hung up. I walked down the hall of creative directors and quit. I left that day for good. The second of the screenplays I had written in those 2 years went on the market 2 months after I left advertising for my guaranteed year of writing. It was called Continental Divide, and for some reason, everyone wanted to buy it. The right to buy it had to be determined by auction. By the time it was over, I had what I figured was about 10 years of guaranteed writing ahead of me. We had entered Wonderland, and things had begun to take on an unreal quality. I could not then, and cannot to this day, relate the financial rewards of the business to anything real. It's like being in the NBA, I guess. You're inordinately rewarded if you're one of the few people able to run the floor and keep up. I had made a fair salary doing work I didn't like. I was paid an extravagant amount to do the work I was dying to do. Life clearly was not fair. I didn't go into it for the money. I went into it for the movies and the licking, of course. But I noticed that what caught the attention of friends and relatives was the outlandish cash. And I'll be the first to admit to you that for a humanist in Hollywood, trying to do serious work, money remains a source of real confusion. The winner of the auction for that second script was none other than Steven Spielberg. The week that he bought it, he sent word that he was anxious to get together with me. I met him on a fake curb, on a fake street, on the Universal back lot. It was the set of I Want to Hold Your Hand, the first film of his protege, Robert Zemeckis. Stephen was very friendly. After all, we were only a couple of years apart in age. Look, he said, I'm going to do this movie with George Lucas, and I think you should write it. Yeah? Says I. Yeah, said Stephen, but when you meet George, be careful. I showed him Continental Divide, and I think he's going to try and steal you away to write the sequel to American Graffiti. Don't let him talk you into it. Okay, I said. I was really only capable of one-word sentences. Well, that's what happened. After 7 years of trying, 2.5 months after leaving advertising, I found myself meeting with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and agreeing to write for them a movie that George had already titled Raiders of the Lost Ark. A movie I would write with enthusiasm and all the skill I could muster. A movie that would bring me recognition and material rewards. A movie which would help speed American movies even deeper into the era of the blockbuster, the era we continue to suffer with today. Mea culpa, mea culpa. I've often been asked how I see myself as a filmmaker. I always say I consider myself a humanist. What does that mean, they ask? And I've always had to improvise an answer. I have no idea how my answer lines up with the beliefs of this religion, this humanistic Judaism. I put mine together with string and paste and a few rubber bands. It goes something like this. I believe there is good in people as well as bad, that they have that potential within them. I believe that there is a collective force at work among people that we are not often aware of. That the force has a power, and that power is as close to a divine power as we are likely to experience. I tried to deal with that in The Accidental Tourist and Grand Canyon and Wide Earth. My work is informed by the conviction that, as John Renoir said, everyone has their reasons. That, as the Big Chill said, somewhat less gracefully, nobody thinks they're an asshole. I think there's a lot of that, and I love you to death, and so Silverado too. I believe that whatever answers we're going to get to the disturbing questions about life that arise each day, those answers are going to come from us, not from above. At the same time, I'm a believer in the mystical. I think there are many forces at work in our world, good and bad, and it is not always easy to recognize. Sometimes when things happen, it is easy to see the cause. But in many cases, it may be much harder, even impossible, to discern why and how something has occurred. Along with this goes a knee-jerk response to most events on my part that says, nothing is just about what it seems to be, that everything has more than one meaning. It's there in Body Heat, in Grand Canyon, and French Kiss, I hope. I believe in fate and I believe in luck. I think those words cover a lot of ground. What we call fate or luck is often the working out of forces we have put into motion ourselves. There's a saying, order is man's dream, chaos is nature's law. I believe that to be true, and that in trying to control our fear of chaos, we create much drama in our lives. That's what Grand Canyon is all about. And it is the theme of The Accidental Tourist. And finally, I believe that a major struggle for all people is the conflict between their ideals and their desires. That has been the subject of my work for the last 15 years. That battle is dramatized, I hope, in every film that bears my credit. A wise person once wrote, a good filmmaker makes one long film his whole life. I believe that. Not all the sections of the film are equally good. I know that. In fact, no one knows an artist's shortcomings as well as the artist himself. No one has given it as much thought. But maybe it's best not to judge the pieces. Better to look at the whole. Better to look at the long movie that someone makes over the course of their life. Of course, in our culture, who wants to wait? I stand here today having directed 8 movies, having written and produced 8 others. 16 films in 15 years. Some have been big hits. Some have been big flops. In my mind, there is no connection between the quality of those pictures and their commercial fate. But sometimes I think Meg, my boys, and I are the only ones who believe this. Oh, and my older brother Mark, who today is working as a screenwriter in Hollywood. In our culture, success is measured very simply. If you didn't win by the conventional criteria, you didn't win. And your effort was probably not that good. When you're working in a popular art like the movies, the pressure to think that way is even greater. In these 15 years, I have received some glowing reviews, and I have gotten some brutal slams. In my mind, there is no connection between those pictures and what was written about them, good or bad. But sometimes I think my immediate family is the only group that believes it. I do not trust the perception or motives of people who have to look at as much crap as movie reviewers do all year long. If I had to see all the bad movies they have to, and then write about them, I wouldn't be writing irrelevant reviews. I'd be killing myself. I'll tell you what you hear when you're in my position. What you see in people's eyes when you tell them that you don't believe that box office and reviews are the criteria by which to judge a movie. You hear this and you see this. You're only saying that because you're defensive. Because not everything you've done has been well received and popular. In other words, no matter what passion you bring to conveying your conviction, they're saying they don't believe you. In our culture, they can't believe you. If you didn't win, you lost. What I like is when someone says to me, by what standards then are you willing to have your work judged? I tell them there are two which interest me. One, my own. Does the movie fulfill what promise I thought it had? Have I done my own work to my satisfaction and been true to that work? And two, time. After 10 years, or 20 years, or 100, how does the work hold up? What does it communicate? What feelings does it evoke in the people who see it then? On this past Saturday night, my family and my in-laws wanted to go to a movie. We couldn't find one. It wasn't that we couldn't agree. It was that there was nothing of interest. I don't think this is unusual, but it makes me feel bad. American movies have never been worse. It's not your imagination. They are bereft of story, plot, character, narrative, emotion, and values. They respect nothing and deal with nothing. They're beautiful, empty packages, produced with the best possible technology for the least possible purpose. If a Martian landed on Earth and went to the movie for his information on the planet's inhabitants, he would come away thinking half our people are serial killers and cops, and that the other half were craven idiots. He would be mystified, I think, by the Earthlings' obsession, their seeming rapture with images of brutality, mutilation, and murder. He would wonder why, in all the films he saw, there was so little sign of compassion, patience, caring, so little grace, civility, everyday courage, so few signs of life. I am of this world, this Hollywood world, but I do not feel a part of it. I am an unlicked cub with drives and needs neither healthy nor admirable. I want success like most Americans, yet I can't get comfortable with the standards by which it is determined. I am not alone. Many people in Hollywood feel as I do. I'm trying to do honorable work, but I feel a stranger in the land that I struggle to enter. My values, I'm afraid, are mostly at odds with the powers that be. I believe that this is why my neck is so stiff. Maybe I am shaking my head in consternation and despair. I am, I think, a humanist in Hollywood. Thank you very much. You are a good guy, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
You feel that way about the smoke? Do you smoke?
Do I smoke?
No, did you have that feeling about the movie Smoke?
No, I didn't at all. And I don't think every movie gives you that feeling. What worries me is that the vast majority of movies give you that feeling. That when you look in the paper, you have to eliminate most of what you see. You don't want to see the images that they create. You don't want them going into your data bank for the rest of your life. You're not afraid because the movies are suspenseful and scary. You're afraid because the effects are so horrific that you'll never get that image out of your mind. I think that's terrible. Yeah.
Did you put any of your religious views into Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes. He's curious whether I'm going to be involved with the next 3 Star Wars films. I don't think so. George has asked me. I'm not interested, I'm afraid. I'd like to be. There's a lot of money in that. See, this is the thing. It's a smart thing to do. It really is. I'm not noble. I like the stories. There's so little time. There's so many movies to make. Why 3 more Star Wars? Yeah.
I love the movie Body.
Thank you.
And I love especially the plot twist at the end. The concept of Kathleen Turner character being a pro. Where did that idea come from? And then that whole concept at the end of the sisters and that great plot at the end.
Where did it come from? That's when I was really working hard to create these stories. And it came from, like, what you do. You know, I don't know if you know what it's like to do these things. You just go in a room alone. And you, like, work all day long. And sometimes all you come up with the whole day is that she's got a sister. Yes.
She passes the schizophrenic street guy and
Yes.
takes the baby.
Yeah.
Did he just, that was so astonishing, so wonderful. It was one of those kind of coincidental, accidental things that happen and it becomes a miracle. Was that what you thought of first, or did that just happen?
No, that's what we thought of. And, you know, that's a movie that Meg and I wrote together, and very satisfying experience. You're talking about Grand Canyon. She's talking about a scene in Grand Canyon. I don't know if you've seen it, but Mary McDonald is a suburban Los Angeles housewife, and she's trying to decide whether to adopt a baby she has found. She runs past a homeless man, and she thinks she hears him say, "Take the baby." And she's not sure, and we're not sure. But she was asking how that came up, and it's part of what we hope is a complicated tapestry of a movie in which people are constantly getting messages and not being sure if they've heard them right, and trying to pick up on the signs around them to guide their lives because they're confused about life as it now exists. Yeah?
Are you aware that as the years go by, the more and more people claim to be characters in big children's faces?
Claim to be here as president? Do I know that more and more people claim to be the actual characters in big shows? I don't have that many friends, so.
How do you suggest someone like myself who's interested in getting into film, in today's world, how would you suggest getting into the film business?
It's hard, really hard. I mean, you have to, the sad truth of it, he's asking how do you get into film. Sad truth of it, there's no good way to get into film. That's why everyone who makes it in is someone who didn't quit and someone who was passionately obsessed with getting in and figured out some strategy that surprised everyone and suddenly they were in. Yeah.
Everyone tells me that if I want to make it in screenwriting, I have to move to LA. Mostly people in LA.
Yeah.
How true is that?
Not at all. If you want to make it in screenwriting, you have to have some talent. That helps. And you have to write and write and write and write the 5th screenplay and the 6th screenplay. And when they tell you you'll never make it, you have to ignore it. And then you probably make it. It has nothing to do with who you know. Anything else? Yeah.
Do you ever get tired of screenwriting and directing? I think it's a remarkable challenge. All the people that started your movies,
That's very nice. Thank you. Complimenting me on my taste in actors, which I appreciate. I love actors, and I love to find them before everybody else has found them. But the truth is, and I'd like to take credit, but most of these people have done some work that I've seen before I see them, and I grab them before anyone else knows about them. And then I get credit for discovering them.
What's your next project?
What?
Your next project?
I'm going to be a slacker. You know what that is? I did 2 movies back to back. I worked for 2.5 years. I was on location all the time, meetings all the time, cutting and getting murdered by the critics or doing okay and being disappointed by the results or being happy with the results, and I'm tired. So I directed a play, and that was really refreshing, and now I'm going to just hang out for a while and see what that feels like.
You have enough money to tie to go.
I figure 18 months. Anybody else?
Two questions. Is there a particular inspiration for the opening scene in Grand Canyon? Second question, is there anything on the drawing board with Jewish content?
Anything that I'm in will have some Jewish content, because I'm Jewish. I am Jewish in the way that I understand being Jewish, which is very much to do with this temple and my marriage. That's probably the last time being in temple really meant something to me. It was when I was married 24 years ago. I have not been a religious Jew in Los Angeles, but I consider myself a Jew all the time. Everything I write, everything I direct, I think has a Jewish flavor to it. The opening scene of Grand Canyon where Kevin Kline's car breaks down is, my son and I were driving home from the forum one night, and I thought I'd take a shortcut. And it developed into a little scary situation, but the tragedy of it for me was not that nothing happened, we were lucky. It was that I should be afraid, that we should be afraid, that I should be afraid for my son. And I had a friend with me, an older man who works with me. It seemed insane to me that we could not drive across our own city without fear, that we were worried about taking a wrong turn, and that for the people who lived in that neighborhood, maybe they felt uncomfortable going into my neighborhood. Thought it was a travesty of American life that we had become this camp, this divided camp, and that there are war zones, and that you cannot accidentally cross the line and find yourself in enemy territory. I was in despair about that. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned you had strong feelings about the values in movies being produced today. I'm curious how you and Meg monitor what your boys see.
Can't.
Can't
do a damn thing about it. In the last 2 months, they've turned 21 and 16, and I'd like to say, well, obviously they're too old to monitor, but I couldn't monitor them before. You have no control. We try to teach them something, try to give them some guidelines for living, but the fact is, I realized finally, it took me years, that these kids were never going to be what I wanted them to be. They were going to be what they wanted to be, and it really bugged me. And it includes what input they put into the system. I have no control over it. Yeah.
What about the future of the wired world and cyberspace and the internet in terms
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. It can't be stopped any more than I can control my sons. But it's right now it's without flesh, it's without touch, it's without sound. When we get to hear voices come crackling through like the first Alexander Graham Bell, it won't help that much. Internet is about people communicating with each other, but it's not about people talking to each other. People say they meet on the internet, but they don't meet on the internet. They see words printed out, and they think that maybe these ideas appeal to each other. It's more inhuman mass. You know, we used to play a game when we were kids, animal, vegetable, or mineral. 20 questions. And now I think it should be like human, inhuman. The internet is inhuman. And I'm amazed by it. I'm not one of these old stirs who's intimidated to the point of not wanting to go near it. I love computers. But I think that if we think this is increasing the communication in the world, we're kidding ourselves. To me, it's like a massive pollution. Because the world just sort of is filling up with all this crap. And we can't see it like we see smog, but it's out there. And this information overload, which comes to us not just through the internet, but in every form possible. I mean, you have to make a rigorous effort to go into your house and not have lights blinking and bells going off and people having called you all day and a list of things to do at the moment when you want to do nothing, On TV telling you more than you want to know, 57 channels with nothing on, things like this. To me, it's all just this, what if it all went away today? What would be lost? Would it be the credit card companies would have a harder time, telephone companies billing you, but you couldn't buy an airline ticket from your home? Well, that'd be terrible. It all gives me a pain. Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to make any movies about the computers because there's going to be so many movies about computers, and who wants to see them? I want to see movies about living things, breathe and bleed, things like that. Yeah.
What do you think about the work of John Sayles, and have you ever planned to do anything collaborative?
No, I had dinner with him once. He was a good dinner company. I like his movies. They're sort of obstinately rough edge. He refuses to be indentured to anyone. But I think there's other ways to do that. I love that there's a John Sayles because there's plenty of other people doing it the regular way. Yeah.
Yes, what do you feel has to happen in Hollywood to turn it around, to become more the films that you had loved and had inspired you to do?
It always comes back to, I don't think the big machine will ever be turned around any more than the internet's going to go away because I don't like it. But what's going to happen, what has to happen always is that individual filmmakers have to understand the power they wield. The truth is that the multiplying opportunities to exploit your product, which is movies, there are more and more ways to sell it around the world, gives the filmmaker a lot of freedom. There's enormous demand for movies. Now what has to happen is that the filmmakers have to turn that demand into their own power. Say, well, maybe in Belgium and Japan and Hong Kong and Holland, they'll be just as interested in a story about two people who meet and have a relationship as they will be about Jean-Claude Van Damme, Kickboxer 5. And once the filmmaker says that and follows through on that through risky and dangerous and scary times, then we'll start to see more and more films that are about it. Yeah.
Has the popularity of VHS tapes and rentals and all that, has it increased a lot of opportunities in movie making industry?
Just in the sense that more money sort of flows into the system, but it hasn't turned into anything good yet. All it's turned into is money. And people are making bad stuff, and they're making more and more money.
The same people making.
Yeah. Very often they're refreshingly new and original. There's less distribution of foreign films today than when I was a teenager. You used to be able to see a foreign film in Wheeling, West Virginia. There's no chance you could see one there today. They play them in 6 cities maximum. And a half dozen foreign films get wide distribution in the country every year. There are dozens of great foreign films being made, and we're not seeing them. They're good. They're very often good, and sometimes they're terrible. Sometimes just because they're subtitled, you think, that's interesting, but it's not. What's important to me now? It seems to me that we all have very limited time in which to do our work. And our work may include our relationships with the people we love. And our work may include our work. And that we have to make the best possible use of that time. If you have been fortunate and you have been somehow freed of the crush of economic demands, then I think you have an obligation to do something useful with your time. And when you are not free to that, then you have to figure out some strategy to make your life meaningful for yourself, even though you're serving some other man.
Mr. Spielberg is working at the present time compiling information about the hidden children of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I wondered if after your arrest you might work with him on a movie.
Well, in fact, my sister is working on him, doing some of the interviews. But that's not my work. That's his work. And he's found many, many people passionately committed to doing it. Yeah.
Despite the creak in your neck,
yeah.
What keeps your head on so straight?
It's not. It's not. I mean, that's the problem, I think. And I feel all the time so confused. I'm overwhelmed. I mean, this weekend, there's no way to deal with the newspaper. There's no way to deal with what's happening. And you can't, and the tidal wave of brutality that we face every day is overwhelming to me. And the struggle is to not give in to despair. So I'm totally confused. I have no sunny view of it, There's someone over here, yeah.
Being in LA and in Hollywood and around all the filmmakers, the thing you said a minute ago about getting those images into your head, and I heard someone describe Seven that way, that they really didn't want to have those images that were now in their head.
Yeah.
How are people justifying sort of the irresponsible films that are being made? Is it just the money, or do they feel it's their art?
Oh, they
And
always, no one ever says, I did this just for the money. They may think that, but they never say that.
But I mean, like Quentin Tarantino has great stories, but
Yeah.
it's so violent that I can't even watch them.
Yeah.
That's just sort of.
Yeah, but they think, look, you can't argue with someone who says violence and brutality is an intrinsic part of American life. You can't argue with that. And I'm going to show it in my art. How do you argue with that? What you can argue about is, are there other stories that aren't being told? Are there other stories that filmmaker, Quentin, for example, and I think he will eventually tell other kinds of stories. You can argue about that, but you can't deny that the world is brutal. Yeah?
What other current American filmmakers do you admire?
Lots. I'm amazed by movies all the time. Someone who you admire disappoints you, someone who you never expected anything from does something great. I can't even name them all. I'm just small. There are certain filmmakers I'm interested in always, but they're unknown people. Their first film just knocks you out. There is no one in particular I'd say. I've made movies that disappointed my friends and admirers, and I've made movies that surprised them in a positive way. But my judgment of those movies may be different. So it's hard to say. Yeah.
Have you ever directed a movie that you didn't write?
Yeah, what?
Have you ever directed a movie that you didn't write and considered doing that ever?
Yeah, I did that. I did that twice. I did it with French Kiss, and I did it with I Love You to Death. And it was great fun, and I had a good time. It's much easier. One more? We're doing one more then? Yeah.
I would like to know what relationship you see between the violence in the films that have been around since Clockwork Orange, which have been growing and growing and growing, and the violence in this country. which seems to be growing along with the violence in the films. They seem to feed on each other.
Yes, I do believe there's a connection. You know, it's one of the terrible things is that Bob Dole stole this issue and he discredited it. He made it hard for people of goodwill and sound mind to get behind it. The truth is, there's some truth to what he's saying. The way he approaches it is all wrong, and nothing he says can be heard cleanly. I believe there's a real connection between our popular culture and the way people on the street think they can behave, and I think it's acceptable behavior. Clockwork Orange, an amazing movie, made in 1972, 3. It is an absolute crystal clear prediction of our cities today. That's what art is supposed to be. Clockwork Orange is not an exploitation of an existing condition. It's a clear, predictive view taken from a wonderfully predictive book. Okay.